Hello, ladies and gentlemen. So I thought about this topic in a few weeks ago, and it's basically about general purpose units and units that are more quote unquote niche. Now, what does niche mean? Well, niche means that this unit can work in certain scenarios and, sucks if they're not in that sort of scenario. Now, in HSR terms, there's not a lot of niche characters, truth be told, but there are characters that depend on certain variables a lot more than other characters. We will be discussing certain niche units in honkaistarrail and what could make you classify as quote-unquote niche. Again, I just want to remind everyone that you could still use them, but it's just going to be a harder walk to the finish. So, the first classification of niche in Honkai Star Rail could be dependent on the number of enemies. There are characters in the game, specifically Erudition and Hunt, depend a lot on the number of enemies in the field. Now, for example, Herta versus 5 enemies is just a monster and almost unbeatable in every single way. But when you put her against any scenario where there isn't, you don't use her that much. So she's kind of specified to a certain game mode, which again isn't that big of a deal because you also have the other side of Hunt units that are single target and works well in single target or double target, but the second they're outside of that, then they start to feel kind of unwieldy. While the Hunt and Erudition class is a bit specified to the number of enemy targets, it's actually much rarer for a character to not care about the number of enemy targets. Units like Acheron, she doesn't care how many enemies there are in the field, she's still gonna do the mostly same amount of damage. So don't take this too much to heart because a unit being locked to a certain number of enemies is a lot more common than a unit that doesn't care about the number of enemies. So yeah, I guess the second thing that could also consider if a unit is niche is the weakness matchup. Now there's obviously, Shui and Luca. And if we look at, Shui as the prime example, her performance drops a lot if you don't have quantum weakness. She could still be used, obviously, but it gets really suspicious if you try to use Shui without quantum weakness, and it sort of borders in the line of the fringe strat if you don't use it. And similarly with Luca, it's a lot worse with him because he'd have to be forced to play DOT and can't play his most optimal, break team if he doesn't have physical weakness. But again, you do have to consider that units being a lot more reliant to their weaknesses is supposed to be the common thing, and units that brute force their element aren't generally going to be the rule of thumb that you have to expect the DPS units. But these units are a lot more noticeably reliant on their weaknesses because of the break system in general. And in Shui's case, she really relies on her mechanic to do damage. And I guess the last thing that you could consider a character to be niche at is their number of teams. Now, the best example of this is Firefly, who legitimately has one team and it's just Super Break. There's not a lot of variations of Super Break that you can do. When you put Firefly in, she basically just has the single team at her disposal. Meanwhile, some units like Fei Xiao could actually go double carry, and she could sometimes go hyper carry if you want to. In Firefly's case, she's very much locked to her support animal, Harmony Trailblazer. Her team situation is not very envious compared to other DPS units. Just want to remind everyone again that niche isn't power, and Firefly is definitely one of the most meta characters alive in this game, like absolutely. And the other characters that I did mention here are pretty strong too. Again, the definition of niche does not mean power, and Firefly is definitely powerful, but she's locked to a certain team style, which by definition does make her a bit more niche than the general purpose unit, but she's very strong at it. So being niche but also being strong is pretty good too. I hope you guys like that topic of video. Comment down below if you think of any other units that might be considered niche with these definitions, or what's your definition of niche. Just do all that stuff, do all the algorithm stuff, and I'll see you later. I'll have a new video up in Sunday, I believe.